Good morning, everyone. I want to speak to you from the book of Genesis. Turn to chapter 41. The title of my message this morning is going to be Joseph Free at Last. Joseph Free at Last. And I just love these Old Testament stories. They're true. These are true stories. These are not fables. This really happened. And when I read these things, I think of how wonderful that God sets forth His truths through the lives of these Old Testament people. And Joseph is one of my favorite, as some of the others are. But I really like this here, Joseph free at last. Oh, when you think of all he went through, it's just over and over and over again, things went bad for him. You know, most of you know the early story. As he was growing up, he was the son of Rachel, and Jacob loved him. In fact, he had really over affectionate love for Joseph over his other children. And as he was growing up, his favoritism toward him caused much envy in the lives of his brothers, and they hated him. Especially whenever Joseph began to have dreams and visions of him becoming a ruler and them bowing before him. And that really got them, because they envious of him anyway. Whenever he said, listen, one day you will bow before me. And when they heard that, it was just like, that's the last straw. We've had enough of your bragging. We've had enough of your lording over us. That's the last straw. And so, you know what they did? They took him and they intended to kill him. But they wound up selling him. And he went into slavery in Egypt and went through there and went through a horrible ordeal. He was a perfect person. He was a perfect worker for Potiphar, the man he was sold to. And he did such a good job for Potiphar that Potiphar just didn't care about anything doing on his own anymore. He turned it all over to Joseph, and Joseph was so dependable, and he was so honest and so true that Potiphar lived the life of Riley, so to speak. He just, asked Joseph, got any problems? Joseph will take care of it. Everything was turned over to him. And in that life of Joseph, we learned something there too, that what a great lesson it is for Christian people to be dependable, to be honest, to be faithful to the person you're working for. I mean, this is great things. And but alas, something terribly happens. Potiphar's wife, and you know the story, and Joseph is accused of making a pass, so to speak, as we talk today, at his wife. And boy, it's really hard for him. Now he's thrown. He was a slave. You think, how much lower can you get than a slave? Well, prison, I think that's even lower than that. I mean, he had it pretty good. Potiphar's house, he was more like a ruler instead of a slave there. But now he's thrown in prison. Had to begin again at the lowest spot. And he has to begin his way upward again. But the character of this young man, Joseph, is so amazing that he wins the affections of the jailer. He wins the affections of the people that are in charge of the prison. And after a while, they're turning everything over to him too. Now, brothers and sisters, I think this is an amazing thing that shows that a faithful person, even in a wicked world, can excel because of faithfulness and honesty and integrity. And so, as he's in this jail, there are things that happen that are amazing. And so this is what I want for you to look at today. Joseph in prison. Now, he's been there a while. He came there to Egypt as a Hebrew slave. Now, when he came there, he didn't understand the Egyptian language even. This young man, he just came there as a Hebrew. Like if you were captured by someone, say in one of these Arab countries, and you would go there and you wouldn't even understand the language. Well, he stayed there long enough till he learned the language. He learned the customs. He knew the ways of the people. And so here we see him in this Egyptian prison. And he don't want to be there. I mean, nobody wants to be in prison. Even if you are the head convict, it still doesn't mean much. And so he's in prison, and we'll take up there in the last part of chapter 40. Well, let me just bring you up to date a little bit there. While he's in prison, the chief butler and the chief baker of Pharaoh were both thrown in prison. You know, Pharaoh got perturbed one weekend, and these people offended him some kind of way, so he throws them both in prison. And both of them, while they're in prisons, have dreams. And Joseph is there, and he notices one day they come in, and they have such a sad countenance. They're both troubled in their hearts. And he said, "Why are y'all so sad today? What's the matter with you?" And I don't know whether it's supposed to be a normal thing to be cheerful in prison or not, but they were even more glum than that. And so this is where they are. And he questions them about why they're so sad. And they relate to them that they both had dreams. And in their dreams, both of them tell them what they were. And to save time, I'm not going to go through the dreams. You know the story. The chief baker had a dream, and the interpretation is, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to hang you. But the butler, in 3 days, he's going to be restored to his former position with all the glory he had before, and he was going to be back in the service of Pharaoh, and everything would be just like it was before. But he requested one thing of this butler, and it was this. And he said, but, verse 14 of chapter 4, he says, "But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Get me out of this prison." Let's go to the Lord and ask him to help us. Father in heaven, please bless this word today. Lord, I thank you so much, O Lord, for making your bounties and your glory and your providences, O Lord. O Lord, show us, O Lord, it's the benefit to us. Because in every moment of Joseph's life, when we learn and study his life, we learn that everything was ordained by you for the best, for his nation, for his family, and for him. And Lord, help us to see that in our own lives. In Christ's name, amen. Well, that was not I didn't think that was too large of a request, being he blessed his butler so greatly and let him know, you're going to be restored to full service, and everything's going to be so much just like it was before. What a blessing that must have been to this butler, well, especially seeing when this baker got hung. What a blessing it was that he wasn't hung. He was restored, and he back to the service again. But Joseph's requests just seemed like, this is a plea. This is really something that he'd been really desiring. Look, will you please just say my name before Pharaoh? Maybe I can get out of this place, And you can put yourself, if you will, in his shoes and see how he must have felt being there. And the Bible teaches us that, that this is something hard for him. Even when he first went there, it says that his hands hurt with the fetters, And so Joseph was not a complaining person. Not a complaining person at all. And in fact, I'm going to read verse 23 of chapter 40, and to show you about how sometimes people are just not very thankful for something someone does for them. And whether it's God or whether it's a person or anyone, the show of thanks is an important thing. But this butler didn't even so much as he was so concerned about his own providential bounty from God about being restored to where he was, that he never gave Joseph seemed like a second thought. In fact, verse 23 of chapter 40 says, "Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph." Didn't even remember him. In fact, I've never seen this word except in the Bible. I'm using the KJV, same one Paul used, and And he said, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. That seems like even a nastier word than forgot. He just forgat him. And it just is, what despondency. He didn't even think about him. 2 years has gone by. It hadn't crossed his mind. Forgot him. And yet there's a strange silence here, isn't it? You don't see a single word about Joseph in these 2 years between that time that the butler got free and this time that he forgot him for these 2 solid years. That's not a thing about Joseph. The scriptures are completely silenced. I don't know if I don't see any sign that he was complaining or murmuring but just continuing. He's just where God has put him. There's no way out. There's nothing to do but just trust. He's totally cast upon the mercy of God. And brothers and sisters, I know some of you may be in some way imprisoned, so to speak, with some great difficulty, some great burden upon your heart. And it's gone on for a long time. It's like an imprisonment, isn't it? When some things that you wonder about, maybe, some condition of someone being grieved over their children. That's a grief to us, isn't it? Grieved over different things that's upon you and burdens upon you. And it's like a prison. It seems like sometimes that there's nobody to go to. And so you're just thrown up on the mercy of God, such as Joseph was here. This is for you this morning. I pray you'll take heart that the things that we grieved with today, even though they seem like almost like a prison to us, we're caught in it and we can't get out of it, and there seems to be no escape, that God is there. He sees every bit of it. He knows all of it. And Joseph was in just like a position that you may be in. And yet, take heart, because look, just watch what happens as we go on in this. He forgot him for 2 years, but it's amazing. Joseph's thoughts or words, we don't know. We can only imagine how he felt. He has no family there, no prospects of freedom, by the way, and no one to turn to. And his weight is entirely upon God. But here in this passage, we learn as time goes on, most of you already know the end of this, that there was a set time in which he was delivered. And what a blessing that must have been. Now, verses come to our mind about things like this. Habakkuk 2 verse 3 says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. And remember, Joseph had a vision, didn't he? In fact, the whole time he was growing up, this vision and thoughts of his mind probably never left his heart about his brothers would one day bow to him. He didn't know all the details of that, but these visions that God sends are remembered, and they're just there. And his whole life is going to be based upon the fact that was prophesied when he was just a young man. And no doubt it was still in his mind, but how it was going to play out, that's the big question. And so it says here in Habakkuk, it says, just a verse that comes through and may apply here, I think it does. It says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Now, I know you're thinking, I don't know what 2 years is. That sounds like tarrying to me. But as we go on with this, I'm going to show you some of the not tarriness passages you'll see here. And I just love the way it ends up, because at the end, just wait for it. Let's just wait for it like Joseph did. Here God's word, here in this passage we see also that the time for Joseph's deliverance has come. Now, Joseph probably woke up that morning just like he always did. And I can imagine that it was just thinking, oh no, this is another day. What if I have to do? He thinks about what burdens and things he has that day. Not a thought that this is the very day he would be delivered. He has no idea what's going on, has no communication with what's going on in the palace, that butler or anybody else. But over there's a lot going on. You see, Pharaoh has a dream, and it troubles him greatly. God sends a troubling dream in Pharaoh. I'm just going to read you 41 verses 2 through 9. I'll start with 1. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, that's cows, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. And what a strange dream it was. I never saw a cow eating another cow, but in his dream, that's exactly what happened. They sound like they were ravenously hungry, starving to death. They jump up on the other side where those fat ones were and ate them up. Strange, isn't it? That troubled me. Think about see a bunch of cows jump out of the water and eat 7 other cows in a flash and just devour them. Methinks I would be pretty excited about that. It's great to read this. And so, it troubled him, but he drifts off to sleep again. But his sleep is once again interrupted. And he dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. That means real plump, real beautiful, ears. And behold, 7 thin ears, blasted with the east wind. And I don't know exactly what that means, but it sounds good to me. It sounded like these things were blasted. They were rough looking, blasted by the east wind, and sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. More or less like the same thing. Here's 7 beautiful and pardon me, I know corn's not the same in the Middle East. It was wheat, over there. It was, but I like to think of the corn we have. These big old ears of corn, and they were big, juicy, and full, plump, like the kind you like to put butter on and eat. And these big ones, they're just majestically and beautiful. Couldn't have been any prettier, healthy as they could be. None healthier probably ever seen. And these old rank, ugly, skinny-looking, east wind-blown ears jump up there, and these ears of corn go there, and they devour these pretty ones, just like them old cows did. Unusual, but that's what the dream was. And so Pharaoh's exceedingly troubled by this, and I think, this is not just ordinary trouble, for God sends him trouble. I mean, this is something that's God sent, so it's going to trouble him. He makes him think about this. Amazing, isn't it? You read this and you see such a strange thing occurring. Ecclesiastes 5:7 says, "For in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also divers vanities, but fear thou God." And of course, Pharaoh didn't have any fear of God, but God had sent them his dream. In Pharaoh's case, the dream is divinely appointed. And there's a divine message in this dream. But there is a huge problem also, because Pharaoh don't have the slightest idea what this dream means. And so it troubles him greatly. And God, I think, has convinced him that this dream means something. He can't let it go. He would like to, but it's there. Troubles him, greatly troubles him. So he makes a great search throughout his kingdom. He wants to know what this dream actually means. He searches, but to no avail. Nobody is able to interpret the dream. And he's greatly troubled. It came to pass, verse 8 says, in the morning that his spirit was troubled. He sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told him his dream, but there was none that could interpret them to Pharaoh. And of course, we knew that a God-sent dream, there's only going to be one person who's going to be able to interpret this dream. And now things begin to make haste. This tarrying doesn't seem to tarry very long. There is a a speeding up of events. Notice the swiftness of God's deliverance as these things unfold. There was no one that could interpret the dream. But now, watch. The chief butler, all of a sudden, Mr. Forgetful, remembers something. And in verses 9 through 13, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Well, how marvelous of you to remember them after 2 years. But it comes to his mind. Of course, we know that probably God helped him remember. He still wouldn't have remembered. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in the ward in the captains of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. But there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. Each man according to his dream, he did interpret. And it came to pass as they interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored into mine office, and him he hanged. And so he relates the whole story to Pharaoh. And if Pharaoh's ears could move, they would have done like a dog. He heard something that gave him encouragement. And Pharaoh was so perplexed that he didn't wait. Go get him! Notice everything happening quickly. When deliverance comes, it doesn't wait. What a blessing. It had tarried long, but now it's not tarried at all. Notice the swiftness with which God moves in his life. And I would just have loved to have observed that day as an outsider if I could have just watched this occur. And then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily. It's urgent. It's swift. It's quickly happening. And he's not aware of what's going on. All of a sudden, they come, get your clothes on. Come on. Well, where am I going? Pharaoh wants you. Pharaoh, what for? Get your clothes. Don't ask any questions. Come on with us. And it's just swift. It's hastily. Things are moving at a swift pace here. And Pharaoh sent and called him. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came to Pharaoh. He hardly had time to change clothes. He's in prison. He hardly has time to clean up, to get ready to run before Pharaoh. But he wants to present himself, and naturally he wants to go whatever the most presentable clothes the prison could have. He wanted to have them, and he wanted to look presentable. He does it quick as he can, and then he's gone. He's ushered into Pharaoh. And what a wonderful thing that is. Deliverance coming. All at once things begin to speed up. Pharaoh hastens him down. Quickly, he shaves himself and everything and doesn't waste any time. And we see great things here taking place. I'm just going to read you a few other passages here. Lamentations chapter 3, 22 through 26. Passages I think are a benefit to us in reading this. It says, it is of the Lord's mercies that we're not all consumed. That's all of us. We are not consumed because his compassions fail not. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Now, I know that Joseph may have had some wanderings about God, but here, notice, the faithfulness of God to his servant is becoming so apparent that God is in control of everything of his life. And now these things are beginning to show forth and being worked out in his life, things he didn't have any idea would come about. And we learned that these compassions of God toward us, they're not going to fail. No matter who you are, in our problems and our troubles and things, God's there. His compassions are not going to fail. Because of his mercies, we're not consumed. These troubles are not going to consume us. God will work them out. And we have to trust in him. The Lord is my portion, it says here. Therefore will I hope in him. I don't know how Joseph's hope was. I imagine he had reached probably as low a state as you could probably get when that dirty butler forgot him. But it was only hope he had, wasn't it? Well, now we see it begin to come to pass. We see his hopes being a thing that pays off for him. And it's a blessing to see. Therefore will I hope in him. And so I believe I don't think Joseph ever ceased to hope in God, even in that glum time. Those 2 years he was forgot, there was still that hope. He had the visions of God that had been from his youth. And he waited for God as the only thing he could do. And the Bible says here in verse 25 of Lamentations chapter 3, the Lord is good to them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. To seek while you wait, to still seek after him, to still trust in him. Wait patiently for the Lord. It's a good thing, verse 26 says, that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. And, of course, what else could Joseph do? Patiently waiting and hoping for him to be delivered, safe from that prison, brought out of it. And it's taking place right now. Verses 31 through 33 of the same passage says, for the Lord will not cast off forever. Sometimes you think, man, this, I'll never get out of this. I will never be delivered from this. It's been so long. You think it ain't only the chief butler forgets, maybe God forgot about you. No, he hasn't forgot. He knows exactly where you are. For though he cause grief, yet will he have compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. He's not forgot about you. He's going to have compassion. But he doth not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men. It's not the Lord's pleasure to grieve you. These things are for a cause, to bring forth more of his glory and more of the greatness of his deliverances. Now, what seemed impossible yesterday becomes a reality today in Joseph's life. Isn't it? It's an amazing thing. We're all excited about it ourselves. I want him to get out of there. I'm tired of him being there. Just reading it, so I know how he must have felt. And here we see God had a purpose, known only to God. We don't understand why things happen when things happen to us. We don't see all the insides, but God gives us a glimpse of Joseph in order that we can apply it to ourselves. Now, you might ask, why did the butler forget him for all those years? You know, why was he there so long? I'll suggest a few things, okay? And I'm simple. In fact, the Bible says the Lord makes wise the simple. I'd hope that I've learned a little bit, that God made me a little wise. But I saw a few things here that I think is so plain you'll see them. We see that God had a purpose for all that Joseph went through. There, and of course, we know there's reasons known only to God why you may be going through something, but God has a reason for you as well as he did for Joseph. And this time, while Joseph was there, now remember what God intended for Joseph to be, right? You all know what he became. He became, next to Pharaoh, he was a chief ruler. Actually, Pharaoh sort of sidestepped himself and set Joseph almost ahead of him, you might as well say, and made Joseph the ruler of the greatest nation on the face of the earth. He was a Hebrew slave one day and the ruler of Egypt the next day. He didn't just come out of prison and become a free man. He came out of prison to rule the greatest nation on the face of the earth. Now that's of great significance here. It just amazes me that it could even be possible to happen. Only with God are these things possible. But that's where God wanted him to be. So we look from where he came from as a Hebrew over growing up as a child over with Jacob in tents and herding sheep, and God don't want him there. The end of where he will be is the ruler of the greatest nation on earth in that day. So he has to be prepared, doesn't he? And so in all those years, we see there's a reason known only to God while he waited so long. And this time, God's purpose in his life, and the reason he was going through this is for a greater purpose. Those sufferings may have been suffering, but he's also doing something else in him to prepare him for that job he really had ahead of him. In that time, he learned to speak the Egyptian language. So well that we learned later that his brothers didn't even recognize him, and he spoke in Egyptian to keep them from knowing what he was saying even sometimes. And so he learned to speak the Egyptian language. In that same time that he learned to speak the Egyptian language, I have no doubt that he learned all their customs and ways. He learned in prison, talking to the Egyptians, living among them. He learned the ways and customs of the Egyptians in order that when he'd get to have this job as this chief next to Pharaoh, he's the chief man in charge of Egypt, he knows the people, he knows about them, he knows their ways and everything. And so he would need to know those things. But there's another thing, and you don't have to be a genius to know this either, that while he was in prison, 2 years passed, right? Let's just, I don't like what ifs, but this would be a good what if to think about, right? What if old Butler had remembered and not forget him, huh? What would have happened? Can we speculate? You think he would have stayed in Egypt? Do you think that he would have said, you know, I love Egypt so much, I want this to be my home? No. Joseph, we learn later how much he loved his father and how much his life centered around the people from which he came. He would have made a beeline back to Jacob just as quick as a donkey could have carried him. He'd have been on his way. He wouldn't have wasted no time. I don't think the sun would have set on him before he'd been en route back to Jacob, wouldn't he? And 2 years later, what would Pharaoh have? There wouldn't be nobody there to interpret that dream, right? Joseph would have never had this opportunity to interpret that dream, nor would he have been put in charge of all Egypt. Nor would he have been able to save his mother and his father from that famine, and his brothers, his famine. Neither would they have come into Egypt, where God made of them a great nation. Do you see? You see why he waited 2 years? He was in the right place at the right time for God's purpose. Perfect. Couldn't have been any better. That was the reason he was still there. And so all these things are a blessing. The chief butler remembered. And Joseph, no doubt, here probably rejoiced exceedingly. I can imagine how he must have felt. He released, and you know, what a blessing it must have been. God had his perfect timing, and all things and the puzzles that we have on earth, God works these puzzles out. Every piece is in place at the right time. And what a blessing this is as God orchestrates the life of this young man. And I can't help but think about things that apply. There's so many things that apply, but just let me give you a verse that applies, I think, in not only Joseph's case, but all our cases. It's like a passage like Isaiah 40, verse 28. And these are verses you know well, but how much more they mean when you see something like in Joseph's life, it being played out. It says, hast thou not known, hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is where Joseph is now. He hadn't fainted, and now he's walking in the light of the glory of God, waiting on God. He's waited so long. He's not going to be weary. He's not going to faint. He's going to take the reins of this new position he has, and he's going to run and not be weary. What a blessing this is that we see these things being worked out. And how much I love this passage. The Lord could well say of us sometimes, whenever we grow weary waiting, oh, ye of little faith. He does all things well. Learn from these passages to wait on God. Isaiah 46, 9, 10 says, remember the former things of old, for I'm God and there's none else. I'm God and there's none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not, yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. And God knows the end of Joseph from the beginning. Everything that happened to Joseph, God had not only knew, he's the one that's going to make them come to pass. He will assure they'll come to pass. That's why he knows in the beginning, because all his pleasure will he do. And Joseph is in all of God's people. God is always working to bring to pass all his will and all his desires and all his designs in our lives. Joseph, in verse 16 of our passage, we go back to Genesis 41. He says in verse 16, really three things, doesn't he? Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And he says three things. First, it's not in him. In other words, I can't interpret dreams. Second, that God would interpret the dream. It's not in me, but God would interpret it. And third, that he would give him an answer of peace to his troubled thoughts. And so in this passage here, we see that Joseph gives God all the glory of what he's done. The gift to interpret Pharaoh's dream does not come from him, but is God that gave it. Acts chapter 17, verse 28 reminds us this, for in him we live and move and have our being. And God was speaking through him. It was in him he interpreted the dreams. It's in him that Joseph lived and was such an honorable person. It was God working out his salvation in Joseph's life. And what a blessing that is as God works out his glory and his character and the lives of his children. Joseph, all the honor you see in Joseph, I think that's a reflection of God in his life. And so Joseph is the perfect example of that. For in Joseph, just like us, it's for in him we live and move and have our being. As certain also of your own poets have said, for we are his offspring. Now we know that Joseph walked out of the Egyptian prison that day. He never went back. Isn't that wonderful? I love the fact that whenever God releases us from something, we don't look back. It's gone forever. What a wonderful thing. When Joseph was released from that prison, he didn't give it a second thought. And I can just see the joy in his heart. I'm reminded in Psalms 126 of how the Lord does this for all of his people. And we have a passage here. When the Lord turned the captivity of Zion, whenever they came out of slavery, we were like them that dream. Is it possible? Am I really free? Is this really happening? I can't believe it's really happening. Yeah, that hurts. It's real. I've been set free. Excuse me. It says, then was our mouth filled with laughter and our tongue with singing. Then said they among the heathen, the Lord hath done great things for them. And oh, how happy Joseph must have been when Pharaoh had sent for him, when he freed him. And it's a glory seeing these passages here like this. The Lord has no trouble freeing his people from prison. We see it over and over again. I could recite many passages. I'm going to show you one in Acts chapter 12. Similar in a lot of ways. It says here, now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter. And verse 4 says, he put him in prison. Here's another prison story. And here's another prisoner, a child of God. And delivered him to 4 quaternions, or whatever that is, of soldiers. Maybe if you have a footnote, I don't know how many, but that sounds like a bunch to me. Of soldiers to keep him, intended after Easter or Passover to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made for him without ceasing of the church unto God for him. Some of you prayed for me this morning, I feel sure. And there's a sense in which whenever you can't get your thoughts together, and you're wondering how the Lord's going to use it. It's like a prison, isn't it? Just like anything else. Anything that you're caught and can't get out of is like, but prayer is made, and you feel like, what a blessing. You're set free from doubts and fears, and I think that's in everything we do. That's an example. God has freed us up to think clearly on thoughts of Him. What a blessing that is. And so, like Peter here, he was in prison. Prayer was made for him without ceasing by the church when Herod would have brought him forth the same night. Now, Peter wasn't expecting deliverance either. He was just a lot like Joseph. He was stuck there. How you get out of prison? You got these quaternons or whatever they are around him. He's surrounded by soldiers. There's no escape, and everybody's, these people are going to die if he gets out. They're not going to put up with him letting Peter escape. So, these people are watchful. But right in that night, here comes deliverance of the Lord. And it doesn't tarry either. It says, and behold. And when I say and behold, when I see these words, and behold, it's like, I'm sitting there, just start looking at the ceiling. Bam! There's some. Look! I'm shocked. Who are you? The angel's there. Isn't it amazing? And behold, meaning surprise. He's there. And look what it says here. Behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shone in the prison. He smote Peter on the side and quickly raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell from his hands. Can you imagine it? Can you just imagine this happening? Here's Peter. Somebody smacks him on the side. Get up. And he's sitting there thinking, who could this be? And he raises up his hands, and the chains fall off of him on their own. No key, no nothing. They just fall off. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, bound up thy sandals. So he did. And he said unto him, Cast thy garments about thee and follow me. And Peter says, he got no idea what he's supposed to do. The angel has to tell him to get up. Get your clothes on. You're coming with me. Let's go. So there's an urgency put on. He's in a rush. Get out of this place. That's how the deliverance of the Lord goes. Remember we said it will not tarry, will it? It's for an appointed time. It's not going to tarry when He comes. Expected all of a sudden. And he went out and followed him, and wist not it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. Sometimes reality seems more strange than fiction, doesn't it? I just can't believe this is happening to me. Am I dreaming? It's got to be a dream. This could not happen to me. It's got to be a dream. No, it's real. God works in such a great, mysterious way sometimes that it's unbelievable to the natural mind. When they were past the first and second ward, they came into an iron gate. Man, look all he's got to go through. He's inside a prison. He's chained down. And there's a gate also that's locked that he has to go through too. And all these soldiers watching him. Not a problem. Not a problem. Isn't that amazing? Which open, and this gate, when they get to it, it opens of its own accord. This thing's locked. You probably have to use 4 horses and a big chain to yank it off the hinges. And yet when Peter gets there, it just opens up on its own. He walks through it. And they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord has sent his angel and hath delivered me out of the hand of Pharaoh and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And I always love this is a good story itself. I'm not going to preach on this, but this is good. Listen, this was so unexpected and so strange that when Peter goes and knocks on the door, or those same people have been praying for him without ceasing, he knocks on the door, and Rhoda comes to the door, and there's Peter. And she goes back and says, Hey, it's the one we prayed for. He's here. Peter's here. Now I'm going to read you some remarkable words here. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. You're crazy. You're nuts. Do you not believe your prayers will be answered? You're crazy, Rhoda. You saw his angel. You saw a ghost. They've come near believing it's a ghost, and it was Peter. But it was Peter. It was Peter. It says, but Peter continued knocking. He kept on knocking. They wasn't going to open the door for him, don't look like. And when they'd opened the door and saw him, it says, they were astonished. And sometimes I think that's the greatest thing we can see is that God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above more than we can think or ask. Isn't that wonderful? He did so much greater than they even thought or asked that they told the girl she was crazy. That's how wonderful the deliverances of God sometimes can be. That we just don't believe it actually happened. Bringing it down to us, and I'm closing here. The Lord is able also to deliver you from whatever captivity or satanic prison Satan has you in. If you're not saved, you are locked up in Satan's prison, just as strongly as Peter was in Herod's prison. Have you longed for and sought for true joy or happiness, and it's just beyond you? Is there any joy in this world? Is anything makes you better off here? Do you see the world as being a source of joy? The Bible says the world is like the life of the wicked like a troubled sea. I know you don't have any joy. I was lost once. And nothing in this world could ever seem to bring a peace to my heart. The wicked are like a troubled sea, tossed to and fro, never quits moving, casting up dirt and mire, always troubled. The wind is always boisterous. It doesn't take much of a wind to stir up a sea, does it? Always moving, always troublesome. That's the way our lives are when we're not with God, when we're set apart from God. The question is, do you want to be set free? Christ calls out to anyone that labors under this burden, do you want to be free? And such simple words. He didn't make it complicated. So simple. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, the world can never give you rest. It cannot give you peace. It's like a troubled sea. It never rests. But Lord can give us rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You can come to Christ. You can take his yoke. You can walk away from the devil's prison today. I pray that you'll see the need for this if you're lost and don't know the Lord. I pray that you will see that everything in the world that you think will bring you joy will fail you. Will fail you. No doubt it will. If you live long enough, you'll see the worthlessness of everything that brings people joy from worldly things. Everything. Even your own flesh will fail you as you grow older. Your strength, your beauty. You may think you're pretty now looking in the mirror, but the time will come if you live long enough, you look like a withered prune in the end. You will not even maintain that. And I just pray that while you're still right now, at this moment, have God and the truth of God being presented to you, you'll listen and take notice and seek God. Seek him while he may be found. And I pray that God will help you see that the only place you can find peace and rest and joy is in Christ Jesus and him alone. May God bless.